Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 66 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. We're glad to have you back with us again this week. And of course, that's Scott Ball over there. Hey man.
Hey, how are you, AJ Matthew, my friend?
I'm doing well, and I'm looking forward to this topic. I think our audience will appreciate it. And I think this, I would say this especially is good for maybe the solo pastor, small church pastor, but this is a principle that goes across the spectrum, and anybody can benefit from maximizing your time each week in your schedule. And I know there's some of us don't do well with time management. Talking about building your schedule to build your church. And we'll dive into this here in just a moment. But many pastors are not intentional, right, Scott, in their schedule. It's more of the schedule happens to them. They don't execute it.
That's right. Yeah. It's sad to say, but most pastors, yes, let their schedule happen to them versus taking control of it. It's not just true for senior pastors, it's true for staff and student ministry guys and worship pastors. We become slaves to the tyranny of the urgent, and we just get done the tasks that we have to get done. And because we fall into a rut of what our week to week looks like, more or less, there's not really a whole lot of change. And so our churches actually are a reflection of how you build your schedule. So if you're disappointed in the results that you're getting in your church, might I suggest, sadly, that you're getting exactly the results that you have earned from how you've built out your schedule.
Yeah, so much of what we see in the church happening good, not happening good, comes back to the leader and how that leader handles things and what things the leader chooses to do or not do. And this is certainly one of them. So yeah, if you could master this, I'm saying most of our audience would be pastor level type people. And if you're a staff member, an associate pastor or a ministry staff person, certainly don't turn this off. Some of our examples might be calendar items that a senior pastor or the solo pastor might have on their schedule, but I think you can easily apply these to yours. But again, regardless of where you are in leadership, others will take on a lot of their characteristics that they learn from you. And so this is a great discipline that you could develop in yourself. And either hopefully intentionally, but even not intentionally, others will at least start to pick up on how you're handling things, especially those, the tyranny of the urgent, as you said, Scott, the people that are coming to you to put fires out, and all of a sudden you're not the fireman anymore. You're like, here's when I'll help you with that, or here's what I need you to do, and I'll have time for that when I get to it, on this day or time.
Yeah.
Maybe that might be a shift that all of a sudden they're like, oh, normally he drops whatever he's doing when I come to him.
That's right. I worked with, I'm thinking of a specific pastor I had the opportunity to work with over the last year. And we made one simple change to his calendar at the beginning of sort of our partnership we did a leadership pipeline design with their church. And I was working with the executive pastor. We made one simple change to his calendar, which was to schedule, I think we went to maybe weekly or every other week, one-on-ones with staff, which he had avoided doing because he thought, I don't want to add all those meetings to my calendar. But what was happening is every day he would get pop-ins.
Yeah.
He would, hey, I want to get your feedback on this. Hey, will you look at this? Hey, will you do this? And he got rid of all of those pop-ins by scheduling weekly one-on-ones with his staff. And so just making that one small adjustment, and then we took one major sort of administrative thing off his plate that he was doing every week. So I guess it was 2 changes. We made 2 changes to his calendar, and it opened up about 30% of his calendar. of his margin to do things that only he could do. So you might be looking at this at the outset of this podcast and thinking, can building my calendar really build the church? And the answer is yes. If you want to see measurable change in your church, one of the most foundational, simple things you can do is take a hard look at your calendar and put some more intentionality into it and see the effects that has on your church.
Yeah, well, I like that you just mentioned that pastor freed up about 30% of his calendar, because we're talking in thirds this week. And so
That's right.
30%, 33 and a third percent, roughly in that neighborhood. I think what we're going to show you today is that probably where maybe your calendar is more 50-50, we're going to carve out another 17% from each of those 50s and create a new third. And
that was good. That was good mental math right there, AJ.
All right. I can't let the audience think I just did that math. When you and I were talking about this topic yesterday, I thought we're really only trying to remove 17% from two areas so that we can create 30% somewhere else, or 34%. Because
you didn't have to give that away. I didn't know you'd done that math earlier.
I just can't. I just can't let people think I'm that good at math. That would totally break my reputation.
It's not difficult math, but it was good on the fly. But now that I know it wasn't on the fly, I'm less impressed.
Or maybe after we're done, I'll say, Scott, edit out that part about me.
No, it's in there for sure.
All right, let's jump in. So we're talking about dividing our calendar into three parts. The first one being spiritual leadership. Scott, unpack spiritual leadership and what that looks like for, especially at our upper level pastoral positions.
Yeah, when people get into ministry, they think that this is 100% of the job. Honestly.
Well, that's what they're taught, right? I mean, this is
right. Yeah, this is like the part that seminary prepared.
All of their training.
Yeah, it's for writing the sermon and investing your time and energy in that. Maybe there's a part of this that's planning out the service or thinking through that. It's also the visitation portion. Visiting people who are sick or shut-ins or people who are grieving. It's the counseling part. It's that pastoral, spiritual work. And I'm suggesting you need to limit yourself to a third. And I know that there are a lot of you guys who are dedicating, you're working, let's just say you're working a 50-hour week and you're dedicating 20 of those hours to sermon writing. I'm suggesting that's not including the counseling and the visitation, all that, right? It's too much. Unless you are privileged enough to be the teaching pastor of a church and you don't have any other responsibilities other than putting a sermon together on for a Sunday, you don't have the luxury of dedicating that much time to it. And I've talked about this other times in the podcast. The reality is that there is a law of diminishing returns in how much time you put into sermon writing. A sermon that you spent 20 hours on is not that much better than a sermon you spent 15 hours on or 10. And you got to put the work in. I'm not suggesting that you write poor sermons or don't think them through or pray them through. I'm just saying don't dedicate more than a third of your calendar towards these things. I think what you're probably already thinking is, wait a minute, if I've got to do my sermon writing and visitation and counseling, there's no way, because there's more visitation that needs to be done and more counseling that needs to be done than I can get done in a third of my week. So there's a solution to that, right, AJ?
Sure. You certainly, if that is the case for you, you certainly have got some work to do on building leaders that can take some things off of your plate. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today has solutions not only in your personal time management, but also in building a leadership pipeline in your church, so that others are taking this thing off of your plate. Visitation is a big one, and we see this all the time, especially with small church pastors, that they own 100% of the visitation. Mm-hmm. And with in a relatively short period of time, no matter how big your church is, you could probably bring 1, 2, or maybe even more people into a level in which they could be doing that. Ideally, what we would be speaking to you about is building small group communities in your church, whatever name you want to use for those, but building small group communities that have leaders in them that are managing visitation and care for a small group of people around them. And what we end up seeing is the relationships built in those groups. That's who they want to have caring for them. I mean, that's who they really know and love. And so care is happening organically within the church, which I believe is the most biblical and natural way for it to happen, and not have a professional caregiver. Not to take away any of the value that you do bring to that process, but it overloads you, and it can be done, I think, in a more effective and better way.
Yeah, could obviously be its episode unto itself, talking about how to make this move, but really building a culture where people understand that that pastoral care doesn't have to come just from the senior pastor, and elevating elders or deacons or other staff members to that same level as you when it comes to pastoral care, and knowing that them laying their hands on you and praying for you is just as good as if it's you. I do understand the want, the desire, the heart for people who are in the hospital who are grieving, to have someone, a senior leader in the church, be with them and pray for them. And I think that's not unreasonable or unbiblical. I mean, we see this in Scripture, right? The elders laying hands on those who are sick. So it's just that can't be just you. That can't be only you. And so if you're looking at your calendar going, I've got way too much when it comes to counseling or visitation or those kinds of things, it's time to start empowering some other leaders. And in the interim, it might mean some disappointed people, and you're going to have to be okay with that. But long term, building up those other leaders to take some of that off your plate. So the first third, dedicate towards the things that you know best. They're the things that you were taught in seminary to do, to write sermons, to do pastoral care. All right, so that's the first one.
Moving on to our second third, this is administration things. Mm-hmm. So probably a lot of this are those fires that get thrown at you all the time, and other things that probably are already taking up too much time. Yeah. So under administration, we're looking at things like weekly team meetings, emails and phone calls, and other things that at least right now or either in reality or perception are things that you feel like you can't delegate out to others. So these are all areas in which probably could be reduced with a little bit of better planning and dedicating time to these tasks.
Yeah, absolutely. If you were to put some intentionality into it, responding to email, for example, is one of those tasks that easily expands or contracts to the amount of time that you allot to it. If you give yourself all morning to reply throughout the morning, interspersed with other activities to respond to emails or whatever, you end up spending way more time in your inbox than you wanted to. But if you were to say, I'm only going to spend 20 minutes each morning working on email, and then I'm not looking at it again until the afternoon, I'm going to spend 20 minutes in the afternoon, and then you shut it off in between. If someone really needed you, they'll get a hold of you some other way. If there was an emergency, there's no such thing as an email emergency. It doesn't exist.
He's choking. Email 911.
Right. So there's no such thing as an email emergency. You could easily do it in the morning and in the afternoon, and give yourself an allotted time to do it, and let that be it.
Yeah. And that's hard. I mean, we're connected with smartphones. They're sitting on our desks buzzing and our pockets buzzing. And what do? It's Pavlov's dog. I mean, every time it buzzes, we pick it up and look at it. So this will require a bit of a shift for you to carve out this time. But
and on this point too, I want to say, AJ, this is another, going back to the example that I gave with the executive pastor I was working with. Sometimes actually scheduling more meetings frees up your calendar more. If you find yourself distracted by a bunch of emails, phone calls, text messages, Slack messages, pop-ins, people popping in, scheduling more meetings might be the solution here. Where you go, okay, well, I've got these 5 people that report to me, that are my direct reports or whatever. And even if you're a solo pastor, these could be 5 guys who are heavily involved in the church, lead ministries within the church. They're lay leaders, and it's 5 breakfasts or lunches that you do throughout the week, whatever. But scheduling those meetings may actually take some of those little drips and drabs and pecks at your schedule away, because you're dedicating 30 minutes to that person every week. And then it's just training them. So then if they pop in their head and it's not something important, you could say, can this wait till our one-on-one? Trust me, you'll only have to say that one time before they'll get a little bit like, oh, kind of embarrassed. Like, yeah, okay. I don't need to waste your time.
Yep.
So yeah, these administrative things are important. They're the stuff, I would say this is the other half.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing two things right now, spiritual care and admin stuff, this is the stuff that you weren't necessarily trained to do in seminary, but assumed you would have to do.
Yeah.
And most pastors kind of limit their calendaring to these two things, or I got spiritual care and I've got administration. But it's this other third, this third chunk that is the difference maker in churches that are moving forward versus churches that are stuck in a rut. So
Right.
this is why we want to be intentional.
Yeah, exactly. So this third chunk, now this new one, and now remember, if you're in the 50-50 time split right now, we're not asking you to take 30% out of each of those. We're asking you to take 17%. So, and maybe exercise through your week. I mean, go through, spend a week noting where you spend your time, because
Right.
I guarantee it's going to be a lot easier when you look at those hours and you're like, could I reduce that by 17% so that I can create a new third? I bet you can. So this
Yep.
third is organizational leadership. And this is where you're going to really begin to see the value in reducing your time spent on those other, presently 50-50 time hogs. Because when you begin to carve out time to work on your church, on your people, the results from that are going to, exponentially drive you towards, goal achievement, mission accomplishment, seeing fruit begin to come out of the ministry, towards your vision. So Scott, walk us through organizational leadership and just a couple of the high points of where time would be spent.
Yeah, before I do that, I just want to mention there's a reason why most pastors don't do this. And I think there's two or three reasons. One reason is that they weren't trained to do it in seminary.
Yeah.
So what does organizational leadership even mean? What does that look like? What kinds of activities would I do? How would I do it? Even if I knew what those activities were. So there's some ignorance there on just not knowing what to do. And so we don't do it. Another reason is there is organizational leadership can at times look like non-work. It's some of it, and I'm going to describe some tasks that you would do, but it can look like non-work. It's not busy work. It's not, it almost, because a lot of it's in your mind. It's a lot of it's thinking work, it's strategic work. And so people could look at it and go, well, he doesn't seem very busy. But if you're not carving out this margin to do the mind work, the thinking work, the organizational leadership, the strategic work, then no one else is doing it. No one else is doing it. And so a lot of people on staff in particular, pastors, some, but definitely people who are on staff who aren't the senior leader, feel like they got to justify their paycheck by always looking busy doing something. And very often organizational leadership from the outside might look like non-work. So you got to get that out of your brain and just go, look, I'm doing important stuff, even if someone looking from the outside doesn't think it looks important. So what kinds of things fall into that bucket? Reviewing trends. This means you're getting good reports. We always encourage senior pastors to get some sort of a flash report each week on the critical numbers that you've chosen to track. If you've worked with us through the strategic envisioning process, we work with you to develop a dashboard called Vision Indicators. And so we will, usually it's 3 to 5 key benchmarks that you're trying to chase throughout the year. And so every week you would want to get a flash report on where you're at on those 3 to 5 things. And so you want to be examining not just the current week's numbers, but the trends. Where are things going? And then tying that back into what have we done strategically? What levers have we pushed and pulled? What buttons have we pressed in order to get the results that we're getting right now? And so thinking through why are the trends what they are and what could we do differently? So this goes into strategy development and thinking, What do we need to do tactically further down the chain of command, so to speak, to get a different result than what we're getting? It's leadership development. This is where you would think through, who could I be building into, mentoring, developing as a leader behind me to take on some of that pastoral care. It's thinking through leadership development as processes. How are we scaling up the number of leaders that we have in our church? It's visioning. It's actually getting out of the office, going on a hike somewhere and dreaming about what the church could look like. You have to create space in order to do these things, AJ.
Yeah.
To think through these things, and it's mind work. And I know that is just a different shift for a lot of pastors. And I'm suggesting, like most guys that I know on staff, AJ, they might spend a day or two every quarter in this kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you, you need to spend a third of your week every week in this space. And it's the difference between churches that thrive and churches that don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Your church secretary is going to be like, on Thursdays now from 3 to 4, he just gazes out the window for a while. Something's wrong.
Right.
But hey, folks, especially the leadership development. I mean, we talked about two things in the previous 2/3, and under spiritual leadership, and Scott just mentioned this, your pastoral care, visitation things requires leadership development. And on administration, the things that you think can't be delegated right now, maybe they can't right now because you don't have anybody to delegate them to.
Mm-hmm.
Working on that, spending a portion of the third of your time building into people that might become someone that you could delegate something else to. What'd you do? You just freed up your calendar. What are you going to do with that time? Well, you're going to do other things that are more productive. And so, it's not a catch-22. You can carve out the time right now to begin. All this is a habit change for you to start doing something that you're not doing now or not dedicating enough time to now, so that you can see the results later and increase your productivity, increase your ministry fruit, increase the capacity of your church to make immature disciples. You cannot overstate the benefits that can be seen from this simple change. I mean, this is the butterfly effect or the ripples in the pond that would go out from this center point. So it really is important.
Challenge your brain and think, read something. Anyway, I got this for free from someone that at a co-working space I use called On Strategy. It's a Harvard Business Review's like 10 articles on strategy. And I was just read one, spent some time reading one, and it challenged my thinking in a particular way. I ended up spending like an hour or two on a whiteboard just hashing out the implications. If I were to buy into the idea that I just read, what would be the implications of that for the Malfers group, and thinking that through. And actually some of the biggest shifts that we've made this year have come from that little whiteboard session. I ended up calling AJ and saying, look at this. What if we did this? And all of that started from choosing to carve out time to read one of Harvard Business Review's 10 must-reads. So if I'm always just replying to email or following up on this email or, getting in touch with this person or working on this thing, like I'm not taking the time to read an idea that challenges my thinking, that spurs the next shift in our organization. And the same is true for your church. If you're always just doing the stuff to keep the church afloat and moving forward and that's sitting and reading a chapter, AJ, looks like non-work. What is he doing? He's just sitting in there reading, but it spurred on change for us. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that's what we're talking about. You need to carve out that margin. I have my best ideas often, when I'm taking a shower in the mornings, right? Because there's no buzzes, there's no dingings. I'm not getting text messages. It's just time alone to think. You need that time. Go for a run, hop in the shower, whatever it is to get away from the distractions, to think. Leaders have to think. And this is the differentiating factor, again, between churches that thrive and churches that don't.
Yeah. Well, I hope you found a nugget in this that you can make a change personally for yourself, or maybe you've got somebody in mind that could benefit from this. We certainly, every week would love to see your comments on this. If you're watching on YouTube, then certainly give this a like, share it, give us a comment below. If you're listening on the podcast, we'd love for you to share the podcast as well, to get it out to other people that you think could benefit from this, whether that's on your team or just somebody that you know. And we're certainly thankful for you coming back week after week, as so many of you do anyway. This has been episode number 66 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. And you can find today's show notes at malfersgroup.com/66, where you can read some of the notes that we have on these topics, and also find there the audio and YouTube links that can be shared also. Scott, thanks for another great topic this week.
Hey, thank you, my friend.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week.